My name is Erin Doran. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation for Catch the Next. And today we have the privilege to hear from Dr. Norma Cantu, who is a professor at Trinity University in San Antonio. Just some background information on why we asked Dr. Cantu to deliver this webinar is that reading and writing practice or literacy is at the heart of the Ascender framework. We believe in the use of culturally relevant texts and culturally sustaining teaching approaches as a way of engaging our students and empowering them in college and beyond. We have invited Dr. Norma Cantu, who is one of our author mentors and who has had a long relationship with Catch the Next, to share her perspective on the importance of culturally relevant curriculum. Her books are used in our classrooms, as are the activities she has graciously shared with us during our trainings throughout the years. We feel her insights on writing and teaching are crucial to the program and thank her so much for joining us today. And so just to help control distractions and things like that, I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone except for Dr. Cantu. If you have questions throughout the webinar, you are more than welcome to put those in the question and answer or the chat box. I'll be moderating it for Dr. Cantu just to make it easier, and then there will be time for question and answers at the end. So without further ado, Dr. Cantu, welcome and take it away.
Thank you so much. Buenas tardes, everyone. It really is a pleasure, and I really want to thank Catch the Next for inviting me once again to speak to a new group of Ascender scholars. And yes, it is about culturally relevant reading and literature, but it's also about methodologies. And I wanted to share with you something that I learned from the UT people who were from UT Austin a couple of years ago through an NEH, actually the Texas Committee for the Humanities, Texas Humanities, or Humanities Texas it's called now. They had this exercise, and I wanted to start with that. But for today, our agenda is to do a place acknowledgement and permission and the crit, and doing the close reading using a Pat Mora poem, and then a reading from my own work to kind of conclude. So I do acknowledge the place that we are at, the Yanawana here in San Antonio, all of our indigenous ancestors who have given us permission to do the work that we do in their land. I also invoke and call for all of my personal guides and ancestors as I lead the workshop, because it really is difficult to do it virtually. I'm so much better when it's person to person, face to face. I can read you. This way, I'm going to rely on other powers that be so that we do have a connection. So this is the poem that I've chosen. And because it is culturally relevant on various levels, I mean, you can teach history with it. You can, of course, teach all kinds of sociological and other elements in the poem. But I'll go ahead and read it. 1910 by Pat Mora. In Mexico, they bowed their heads when she passed. Timid villagers stepped aside for the judge's mother, Doña Luz, who wore her black shawl, black gloves whenever she left her home, at the church, the mercado, the plaza, in the cool evenings when she strolled, barely touching her son's wrist with her fingertips, who wore her black shawl, black gloves in the carriage that took her and her family to Juarez, border town, away from Villa, laughing at their terror when he rode through the village shouting, spitting dust, who wore her black shawl, black gloves when she crossed the Rio Grande, who wore her black shawl, black gloves into Upton's 5 and dime, who walked out, back straight, lips quivering, and slowly removed her shawl and gloves, placed them on the sidewalk with the other shawls and shopping bags. You Mexicans can't hide things from me, Upton would say, "Thieves, all thieves, let me see those hands," who wore her black shawl, black gloves, the day she walked chin high, never watching her feet on the black beams and boards still smoking that had been Uptown's five and dime. So we're going to look at this poem today. I'm using it to talk about the steps in doing a close reading of a text, a piece of text. And so the first level is to paraphrase what's going on. So take out your paper and pen and go ahead and start jotting down read the passage carefully as I just read, and in your own words, give a summary of the factual content of the passage, what the text directly states as it proceeds from beginning to end. You may want to answer the question, what is the situation described and by whom? What happens in that situation? And I think 2 or 3 sentences will suffice. Here's the poem again, so you can be looking at it as you take a few minutes to do this. Okay, you should have a couple of sentences. Maybe you wrote, Doña Luz is here, coming from Mexico, and is discriminated against in a store. But at the end, that store has burned down. And those are facts. That's in the poem as factual. And that's all you need, just the facts at this level. The second step, we go back to the piece, but now we're observing what's going on. So we look at it again and ask, what is it seeking to achieve? What's the purpose? What's the goal? What is the effect? And here we're going to list the textual elements that lead to that goal, purpose, or effect. And you'll find lots of details, word choice, repetition. This poem uses repetition of phrases, sounds, ideas, the imagery or figurative language, similes, metaphors, syntactical structure, changes in vocabulary, rhythm, tone, characteristics of the narrative voice, who is speaking, or the perspective. So again, take a few minutes and jot down what textual elements come to you. And here's the poem again, so you can look at it. And you don't have to write down the words, but it'd be a good idea to just say, for example, repetition of who walked out, or that she strolled barely touching her son's wrist, and that later she walks, never watching her feet. So just things that come to you as you look at the poem. The description of her life in Mexico, and then the description of her life in El Paso. Details like the black shawl and the black gloves. You're just listing, you're not writing sentences here. The sentences were first when you were summarizing or paraphrasing. Okay, I'm sure you have a list. We'll continue. Because the next level is to contextualize the narrative. What is happening here? Think about the context for the passage. What are the things around the text that give it meaning? And here you can use your own knowledge of any relevant contextual facts or circumstances, or from information that you have gained from research. And here you identify and list potentially significant context for the passage. For example, for me, the title is a sure thing. It's the setting and when it is happening and the place. So those are part of the context. It's 1910, it's El Paso. And those contextual frames then contribute to the passage's overall meaning, the purpose, or the effect. So again, let's take a couple of minutes and look at some contexts that come to you as you look at the poem again. Go get her.
She can't get into the Zoom.
Can't help her.
No puedes.
Let me tell them. There is somebody calling me that she can't get in. And Maria, you're muted. No.
Okay, if you let us know who it is, we can contact them.
It's Elsa Ruiz.
Oh, muy bien. I will send her the link. Thank you.
Okay, she's going to send her the link.
She's going to send you a link.
Thank you. Okay, let's go on to the next step. I'm sure you found a lot of contexts, not just the setting. Okay, so in the analysis, now we're getting to the nitty-gritty, if you will. And so we're looking now at the features and the context that you already identified in the previous steps and selecting 3 of these elements or contextual frames. And in a sentence for each,
We lost her.
Yes, we did. Uh-oh.
Hello.
Okay, why don't we hit pause for a second? I'm gonna email her and maybe her.
Okay, so as I was saying, I'm so sorry. I don't know what it is. The sound, and so I had to change to my laptop instead of my PC, and now this. But anyway, so at least 3 of these textual elements or contextual frames, and for each, explain how it is significant. What does it mean that it is set in 1910 in El Paso on the border? What does it mean even for Doña Luz to, if you had one of the things was that she's wearing a black shawl and black gloves? So what is the significance? And just 3 sentences will do. You can say a detail that she walks on the boards is significant because it shows, go on and complete the sentence. And just take a couple more minutes. I hope I don't go out again. Okay, the next step, and there's the poem again, is to argue, to kind of come to why you're doing this. So we reread the work, a poem, I'll put it up in a minute, and using your observations and analysis, write a paragraph, at least 5 sentences that conveys your interpretation of the passage. And I'm going to give you a little bit more time here, maybe 5 minutes, so that you can think about what you've written and look at what the steps are, where you are, and then write your interpretation of the passage. Often students will be baffled when you get to this stage because they don't understand what we mean by an interpretation. And so you may want to have them answer questions, or to especially write their main thesis. What is the claim? What are you saying? And the supporting that claim are the things that you have jotted, that list of details, the context, the analysis that you've done. That's what's going to be the support for that thesis. And so it helps them to understand that there's a process, that you don't magically interpret something just because you like it or not like it, but that there is evidence in the text itself. That's what close reading is all about. And I usually start my students with the close reading, and then we go into theorizing. And I'm not going to go too much into that at the end, but I will mention some of those ways to do that with this piece. So I'm already about half a minute into the 5 minutes, and I'll shut up for a little bit so you can think and look at the poem again and see what it is that you've done, and write that 1 paragraph with about 5 sentences. We have about a minute left. Okay, that was my timer. And now the next step is to reflect on all of this. We have advanced an argument. You can look at the poem, see if you're happy with what you have written. Is this the analysis? I was able to actually, I picked a poem I had not used before because I wanted to work along with you. And I'm very pleased with my paragraph. It's actually 4 sentences long, not 5. I'm almost there. I probably could add another sentence to kind of conclude. And so I'll just read a little bit of it so you can see and you can compare and see if you were on the right track with it. The poem 1910 tells us of discrimination in El Paso at the turn of the century. The black shawl and gloves symbolize mourning. Doña Luz is the opposite of light. Her name is light. And the thieves, the store owner claims, tells us of the stigma that she must live with. It is significant that the poem ends with a triumphant step, and Doña Luz is somewhat vindicated. The threat in Mexico of Villa, that's Pancho Villa during the revolution, who is a thief, and of Uptown in El Paso, who claims that she is a thief, brings up a conundrum. The poem underscores the class and ethnic influences that Doña Luz confronts from being upper class to being an immigrant. And that's as far as I got. But do you see how you bring in what you listed, the details, and you then interpret that? And so the interpretation at that level gives us then more food for thought that you can go on and answer some other questions. So it's not all there. There are some aspects of the passage that might be confusing and some elements that the interpretation didn't get to, either by choice. I chose not to talk about her family, for example, that she mentions, or things that you want to look at later in the next paragraph, perhaps. Parts of your argument may be now kind of curious. As I was reading it, I thought, well, yeah, Villa was a thief and her class changed from being pretty upper class in Mexico to now being an immigrant and having to suffer, if you will, the same kind of status as what she probably had people go through over there. So there's some things that are still kind of not clear. There could be objections that a reasonable person could raise to my interpretation. You perhaps would say, well, it is discriminatory and maybe she had to take off her shawl and gloves because other people had been stealing from Uptown. So there's arguments that can come up. But keep in mind that no interpretation is perfect. It's what it is, it's an interpretation. And every element of a text cannot be accounted for. We don't know. Nonetheless, in these reflections, I hope you have begun to think about how to approach a text like a poem. And often I hear students and sometimes teachers say that they hate poetry because they always get it wrong. Well, but if you start from the facts, there's no doubt you can't say it's wrong. the title of the poem is 1910. They are in El Paso. So if you start from that premise and then slowly work through all the steps, you get to an appreciation where you can actually do interpretation, analysis, evaluation. Now, how do you theorize from here? This is just the critical apparatus for doing a close reading. But how do you get to the next step? Here, I would ask students to bring in their own experience. Maybe they have someone in their family who came because of the Mexican Revolution, or stories in their family about the Mexican Revolution, to contextualize it further for the students. And you will find, especially if they are immigrants, the students will, some of these things will resonate with the students. Police profiling, or things that have happened to them, the way that they speak Spanish, and maybe have been stigmatized for it. So it brings up all kinds of other things that you can then, this can be the starting point for much more, and a very rich conversation. So I wanted to attribute this to the CRIT, Department of English at UT Austin. These are the professors that worked on it. And if you want to get more information, there's also a very short video. I think they use a poem from Whitman to do what we've just done. And it also is very informative, and you can get an idea of how to apply it to other texts. Now, if I were doing this with a novel, I probably would break it down into sections or chapters and ask the students to do the same thing. Paraphrase all the way, each step, all the way to where you analyze and evaluate. And if you notice, we have gone through the Bloom's taxonomy of learning, and also in a way going beyond it when you start theorizing. So can we theorize about the border with this poem? Yes. We can bring in historicity. We can talk about what Ansaldúa would call autohistoria, because the narrator is telling the story, but it is focused on one person's history. Historia in Spanish can be either history or story in English. So we're looking at a story that is also a history. So there's ways of theorizing from that particular piece. So I'm gonna now switch and do a reading from my own work. I think some of you yesterday heard or worked with Allegra on one of the pieces from Canícula, Snapshots of a Girlhood en la Frontera. The piece was China Poblana, I believe. I'm also gonna then go to my newest novel, Cabañuelas, which takes the same protagonist, Nena, on to the next stage in her life. And then I'm gonna read a couple of poems from the collection Meditación Fronteriza, and then we'll open it up for discussion. I told you that hour is gonna go by really fast. So from Canícula, there's the story, the epigraph is really important. And I often tell students that the readers tend to skip the epigraphs and authors spend a lot of time working on them. So the first one, brinca la tablita, yo ya la brinqué, brinca la de vuelta, yo ya me cansé. It's a children's game. It's a game we used to play when I was a kid. All photographs are memento mori from Susan Sontag. The US-Mexican border is una herida abierta where the third world grates against the first and leads from Gloria Ansaldúa. And these three epigraphs tell you what the whole book is about. It's about childhood and growing up. It's also about photographs and memory. And it's also about that very painful border, that wound that is there that will not heal, that Pat Mora also talks about. She from El Paso, I from Laredo, same border. So it's a story of a family. These are the kids in 1952. My brother, who was killed in Vietnam in 1968, is the one pointing kind of playing like he's pointing a gun. And this is the one that you read yesterday and that you then wrote about. The exercise using the photograph is a very effective tool. It also, you can do a self-analysis So you have the students write the piece like you did yesterday, and then go back and do a close reading. It also helps, as a writer, I do it too as an exercise. I go back and add detail and add context. So it can work in both ways. It can work in reverse when you're writing as well as when you're reading. So let me read China Poblana. Smiling, I look straight at the camera. It must be, I grimace, smile, squint under bright sun. Must be around noon, not a shadow shows. We have just returned from the George Washington's birthday parade. I hold up my China Poblana skirt and point my toe. I stand for the photo. Mommy has braided my shoulder-long hair, adding volume and length with yarn, green, white, red, verde, blanco y colorado, la bandera del soldado. The dazzlingly white blouse embroidered with bright silk to shape flowers like the ones that grow in our yard, roses, hibiscus, geraniums, even some that look like the tiny blossoms on the moss roses remind me of summer, although it's a warm February day. I know Raul is hiding behind his dad's car to make fun of me. I pretend not to notice. Instead of his teasing though, I hear a whistle, a wolf whistle, and I become even more upset than if he had called me skinny or wetback, yelled his favorite taunts, mojada, flaca. I mustn't move because mommy wants me to stand perfectly still until she takes the picture. I resist the urge to grab a stone and hit Raul with it. My aim is good. If only I could. And I feel like the chalupa in the Loteria game, like Maria Felix or Dolores del Rio, a movie star frozen in costume. But then it's all gone. Just like the Dutch remolino that came up unexpectedly and left us all dusty. A lonely urraca lets out a loud cawing in the noon heat, predicting a change of weather, warning of the freezing winds that will hit later that afternoon and cut into my face as I ride the wheel of fortune at the carnival, where I'll bite into pink fluff of sugar and find it disappear into sweetness. We go inside the house. I have lunch, sopa de arroz, picadillo guisado, fresh corn tortillas with orange flavored Kool-Aid. And mommy tells Welly I'm growing so fast the costume won't fit next year. Dalia will wear it to the parade. I cringe and I want to cry, but I won't let the thought spoil the present. And I ask, can I buy cotton candy at the carnival? Maybe I'll even win a little pink or blue chick to keep me company. And I do. But when the chick becomes a chicken, Welly wrings its neck, drains the blood, and we have arroz con pollo for Easter. See, normally you would be smiling. I would be having fun with you as I perform that piece. So I'm imagining that you were carried with it. I don't know if you had the text in front of you, but you had the image in front. And so you can see the little girl that I was at that age. The next piece I want to share with you is from Cabañuelas, from the new novel, where Nena is now all grown up and she finds herself in Spain doing research on fiestas. Now, the fiesta in China Poblana is the George Washington's birthday fiesta in Laredo. You may ask why. Well, it's a long story, so I won't have time to go into it. Suffice it to say that all communities have fiestas of some sort or another, and always they bring people together. It's kind of like a social glue. Sometimes some people, other times other. So the title of this one is Cabañuelas, and the epigraphs are also critical. Living on borders and margins, keeping one's shifting and multiple identity and integrity is like trying to swim in a few elements, an alien element. That's Gloria Ansaldúa. Yo no soy bonita ni lo quiero ser, porque las bonitas se echan a perder. It's a hand clapping rhyme from my childhood as well. Only the things I didn't do crackle after the blazing dies. And that's my friend Naomi Shihab Nye from a poem. I'm going to read just a short excerpt explaining the title. So Nena, the same character who's in the China Poblana, is now grown up and she's in Spain, and she has a love interest. And so Paco is his name. And I'll just read it. It's March, time to travel south to record fiestas, spring rituals. Paco is driving Nena to the tertulia. He was going to work for a bit in the office and would pick her up later. February is my birthday, you know. Sí, Nena whispers, febrero loco. Y marzo otro poco, Paco completes the saying. Así es. Wonder where that comes from. The weather, Nena answers. It's crazy how it can change. That's why the cabañuelas work. What's that, cabañuelas? Paco asks. She explains. It's what happens in January that tells you what will happen the rest of the year. A ver, ¿cómo está eso? Brujerías? Is it witchcraft? What is that? No, it's a way of finding out what's going to happen. My dad told me all about it when I was a kid. Aún recuerdo. He made a point of teaching us about the stars, constellations, all of that. Cosas que solo los del campo saben. You know, because he was of the earth. Always loved growing things. Corn, squash, tomatoes, hasta sandía. Big, juicy watermelons. And the cabañuelas is how he would know what the weather would be like. In February and March, it was crazy, bien loco. Paco seems satisfied with her explanation. Nena thinks about the old ways, the old knowledge that helped people survive. Wish there were cabañuelas for figuring out what's going to happen to relationships, she says aloud. Haha, not possible, Paco answers. Relationships are even more unpredictable than the weather. Febrero loco, marzo otro poco, y tú y yo, even crazier. And I'll stop there with that one so I can have time to read a couple of poems. But I did want to show you some photos of the fiestas that I studied when I was in Spain on a Fulbright, which kind of half reflects the autobioethnography of cabañuelas. This is a fiesta in Samarramala, where women take over the town for a day, once a year, on the feast of Saint Agatha. And this is also part of that fiesta where the women are now dancing out in the street. These are danzantes in an endiablada. It's in February, La Fiesta de San Blas. And I put this in here because I wanted you to notice there's a Star Wars shirt that the guy is wearing. And then this one was in San Juan, actually St. Joseph's Feast in Valencia. They construct these elaborate constructions on the streets, and then they burn them up on the night of St. Joseph's, March. I think it's March 23rd, 21st. And this one was curious to me because the theme that year was Disney and characters like, yes, the Smurfs. This one is also in Valencia, but it's during the religious part of the celebration. And this is in Moros y Cristianos. It's in Alcoy. Too bad I don't have time to read all these stories from the book. This is a letter that Nena writes Paco, and she says, I'm sending you this photograph of a bull. No special reason, just because. And there is Nena taking a photograph of herself. It's I call it a selfie before there were selfies. And so she's just looking into a mirror, taking a picture. What might be interesting to note here is that I personally was doing the research, right? But I didn't take pictures of myself. I was doing the one photographing. And partly because I didn't like to have my picture taken. So I'm very fortunate that I don't know why, chose to take this picture, because then I was able to use it like 40 years after the research, 30 years. It was in 1980 and then in 1985. So let's go on to the poems. I'm only going to read two. The first one is called Miel de Mezquite. All of us in Texas know about mezquites, and maybe even in the Southwest, but very few of us Nowadays, the kids don't do that, but we used to chew on the mesquite pods. And that this poem is about that, but it's also something deeper. Go back to that exercise and think about how this poem could also be used, because it's telling one story, but it ends up somewhere else. Every spring, explosion of new green surprises me. The mesquite in our yard wears an Easter frock, accessorized with yellow blossoms. Soon the fruit, juicy and crunchy at once, will weigh down scrawny limbs. De niña, on lazy, dusky evenings, after homework, after playing a las escondidas, I harvested bean pods, la miel from the tree trunk. I chewed on sweet mesquite fruit. We, siblings and neighbors, trade stories in the dimming eve as we go through pod after pod. The waxing moon can't wait to be full, and mommy calls out our names. Norma, Tino, Laura, Elsa, Leti, Mari, Sandra, Celia, Julio, Jerry, Ricky. In her 80s, alone, mommy dwells in the past, where children still crowd around for dinner, bean tacos and cinnamon tea with milk. Ghost children, laughing, playing, arguing, crying, sleeping. They keep her company. The mesquite, still there, still surprises me. La miel de mesquite, still sweet, still lingers. You see how it went through a cycle from one memory then to the next. And then I'm going to conclude the reading with another one that is about my mother. She was an incredible woman to have had 11 children. I'm the oldest of 11, and a very wise woman too. And so this one is called My Mother's Hands. Those hands, her hands, I know them well. My mother's hands, hands that wipe many a baby's bottom, hands that crochet the booties and hats and blouses and scarves, tablecloths and afghans. Those hands that rolled out thousands of flour tortillas, empanadas, pie crust, tortillas de azúcar. Hands that lovingly caressed my father's face, that wiped away a child's feverish forehead, that playfully patted a passing child's behind, maybe even raised a chancla to threaten a child acting all chiflado. Hands that massaged a colicky baby with olive oil. Hands that smacked a mosquito about to bite her baby. And equally adept, oh gosh, so sorry. Hands that massaged a colicky baby with olive oil. Hands that smacked a mosquito about to bite her baby and equally adept shoot away a fly from landing on her face. Hands expulgando a grandchild en las tardes de verano, piojito, or expulgando a beloved pet looking for pulgas or garrapatas. These are my mother's hands. In youth, deftly applying lipstick, now gently, but obsessively, nervously twitching, wrinkled and worn out, yet warm and loving. She holds out her hand. Mira que vieja estoy, she exclaims, surprised by the wrinkled skin, the liver spots, the twitch. At every goodbye, she expertly forms the cross with her thumb and index finger, touches my forehead and blesses me. Que Diosito te bendiga. And that's it. That's the reading. And I would like to now, let's see, Erin, do we have questions?
So far in the chat box, I'm not seeing any questions. So if anyone wants to ask any.
Also, if you don't have any questions, I do have a pilon to give you, but I'll wait and see if anybody asks something. No? Were there comments?
Susana just said that these were beautiful poems. Cynthia Cantu made, I think this is a funny remark, the infamous chancla.
Yes.
Elsa, your sister, said that these were her 2 most favorite poems. Let's see. Oh, here we go. So Allegra is asking, what is your writing practice? Do you have a routine or set time every day? And what inspires you most now?
Right now, what inspires me, I guess, is the way that our world is in a pandemic and how we're going to survive it. It's in April, it was National Poetry Month, so I wrote a poem every night, and not surprisingly, many of the poems were about COVID-19, about people that died, my friends, a former student, and the suffering people were going through throughout the world. And about the writing practice, it's kind of ideally, I would love to be able to just sit and write nonstop, to hide away somewhere and just be able to do that. But that's not very realistic these days. And so I don't have the luxury of doing that. But that's the goal, is to be able to write every day nonstop, just take breaks for lunch and sleep and just create. Because as a practice, writing is meditative, and I find that often I lose myself. I was up last night till 4 o'clock, partly writing, but also partly working on this PowerPoint and the presentation. So I think once I get into the zone, if you will, it tends to just carry me like water. That's the title of Ben's book, Carry Me Like Water, because it just let yourself go with the flow. So the other part of the practice that I recommend for anyone is that it should be regular. If I go too long without writing, it takes me longer to get back into it. I have a novel I'm working on right now, and I've been away from it maybe 2 years, and it's very difficult to get back into it. My plan was to finish it this summer. I'm now looking at it and thinking, maybe not till December, maybe not until next summer, because I haven't had a chance to really just wallow in it, if you will, and get into that world.
Wonderful, thank you. So there are a few comments. So one comment from Cynthia said, I always find it interesting what my dad said once about being an immigrant. He sometimes wonders what it would have been like if he had stayed in Mexico. 1910 brought that to my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that that happens. It's associative relationships. We see the year and we think of our loved ones and their experiences. My mother was born in Corpus, so she was not an immigrant, but my grandparents were. And so when she was 10 years old, they were repatriated to Mexico. And she grew up between ages 10 and 16 in Mexico. And so then she came back and started working in Laredo, and her parents stayed in Mexico. So the border is a very special place. And I know my mother often probably thought, what if we had stayed in Mexico? And I think she was very glad they didn't, because we wouldn't have had the opportunities that we did, even though Laredo was not the best of places. The schools were poor, all of the other things that happened on the border. It was still a pretty safe, in quotes, space to raise a family. My father was from Mexico, so they married. She was 19, he was 29. And so he was an older dad. And I too think about that. What if they had not married? Or what if my mom had married El Dulcero? There was a man in her community who made candy. And if she had married him, we probably wouldn't have come to the US.
Carla has asked, when you begin to write a poem, do you intentionally force yourself to write, or do you have an idea that you elaborate on?
I don't force myself. I know some writers do. They have to write something. I allow it to happen. And sometimes it forces itself on me. So it's not that I force myself to write it, but the poem will not let me be until I write it. And part of the poems that I was talking about in April were like that. It was like I was chronicling, like I was un testimoniante. It was like a testimony of the lives and the places and the world we're living in.
Mhm.
So it's almost like the poem has to be written, and I'm basically just the vehicle or just the conduit for the poem. It starts somewhere else. And sometimes I'll hear a phrase or I'll see a word and I start kind of mulling it over. And before I know it, there's a poetic line that I can't let go of. And if I do, I forget it. So I try to write it down and keep it alive. The same thing with dreams. Sometimes the fiction comes from incidents in my dream life, because the dream world on some level is where I work out some of the stuff that's happening in the fiction.
Mhm. Maria Marta has asked, how do you suggest that faculty that are not bilingual tackle literature that uses both languages? How do they fill in the gaps and infer the correct concepts?
Mm-hmm. There's Google Translate. I'm being facetious. I don't always recommend Google Translate, because some of the words, for example, that I use are not going to be there because it's South Texas Spanish. But I think a lot of times the accessibility of a second language or a third language, I mean, I do it when I read French or German writers. Sometimes they use code switch texts as well. You just look it up and do the work.
Mhm.
Sometimes students aren't ready to do that. So I teach them how to do context clues, how to figure out the meaning of a word. And then they go to the dictionary and either it's right or it's not. Oftentimes it is, because writers are very savvy about doing that. At least I try to do that with my work. When I use a word in Spanish, I often have a context around it so that you don't need to go to the dictionary, although it might help, but you get the gist of it. There's a line in another one of the pieces in Canicula. It says, chinches, garrapatas, some or all of these pests, ticks, fleas, tiny spiders the color of sand, some or all of these bichos. And so the translation is within the text. You still get the yucky feeling of these bugs, but it is not a direct translation. Bicho and pest are in there, but not next to each other. And I think it's a skill, reading a text that is bilingual when you're monolingual. It happens all the time. And I think that for me, it's essential because the border is like that. That's how we speak.
Mhm. Christopher has asked, what do you think about the blending of Spanish and English that we here on the border see on a regular but diminishing basis, especially in educational settings?
Yeah, I don't think it's diminishing in the community. You hear it, people speak it. The lingua franca of the border is this Spanglish or Tex-Mex, we used to call it. And I don't know that we should clean it up as educators. We need to acknowledge it, honor it, add to it, so that speakers, our students, can be multilingual. They can speak Spanglish, why not? And as well, speak Spanish and English. It's a richer linguistic repository that you can draw from. And it also, I think, reflects a more, I don't know, like a gymnastics of language, so that you can jump around and express yourself in many different registers. We actually all do it, even in English. People who are saying or tell me that they're monolingual English speakers, they don't speak the same English everywhere. They switch registers when they're with friends, when they're with their family, when they're in formal settings, if they go to the court, so that there's different levels of that language that needs to be translated as well, because it's not common language.
Mm-hmm. Sumita wrote this. I don't know that they meant it necessarily as a question, but I'll read it as such, that you know, how is it that using words from another language can help pique students' curiosities about other cultures?
Yeah, I think that is not a question because it sounds like a comment, because languages or the use of languages always on some level piques someone interest. You want to know more about that culture. You want to know more about where it's coming from. You want to know what it means, basically. And so in a way, I think it is a good way to have students explore other cultures and other worlds. You know, that first image I had up there of the world with the word hola, hello, uh, ciao, all around the world, all these different languages for saying hello. It goes back to my title, Cada cabeza es un mundo, because each one of us has a world. And if we can recognize and speak more languages, our world is that much larger. We can communicate with that many more people in the world and make it better for all of us. So definitely, I think it is an entry or a portal for students to explore other cultures.
Wonderful. Did you want to go ahead and share your pilon?
Sure. It's another poem. This one is by Abelardo Delgado. And I had thought of using this one, but I thought, no, I'll stick with Pat Moran. It's a classic from the Chicano movement. Stupid America. See that Chicano with a big knife on his steady hand? He doesn't want to knife you. He wants to sit on a bench and carve Christ figures, but you won't let him. Stupid America. Hear that Chicano shouting curses on the street? He is a poet without paper and pencil. And since he cannot write, he will explode. Stupid America. Remember that Chicano flunking math and English? He is the Picasso of your Western states, but he will die with 1,000 masterpieces hanging only from his mind. I've always been touched by this poem because it is about potential. And Abelardo Delgado was a Chicano poet from Denver. I met him when I was in graduate school. He came to do a reading in Lincoln. And as an English major, I went to his reading. I was excited because it was like a Chicano coming to read poetry. But then when he started reciting his poetry, I thought, oh my God, this isn't poetry. He's being political. And remember, this is like in the early 70s. And so then I was being very judgmental, just being an English professor, if you will. And then I turned around and there's this old viejita sitting on the side and she's just sobbing. I mean, her sobs are like palpable. She's crying because of the poems he's reading. And then I realized that it was the audience that makes the poem. And it was poetry. Not only poetry, it was good poetry because it was touching that person and it was touching others in the room. But I had not allowed myself to be vulnerable, to be touched by it. And then I just kind of shifted. It was one of those epiphanies where all of a sudden I saw that this poetry, very political, very much a Chicano movement, in some ways very macho poems, were really functioning at some level that I needed to listen to and pay attention to. And I could even say that my own work changed after that. That's the pilon.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So Dr. Cantu, it's always a pleasure to have you with us and to be able to share some space and hear your wisdom. So thank you very much. And to everyone who attended, thank you for being here. We really appreciate your presence as well. So I do
want to say thank you to Maria Marta for inviting me.
Thank you.
And of course, all of you for joining the Ascender program. I can't say enough about Catch the Next. It changes lives.
Thank you.
Not just the students, but also I think the teachers, because we learn an appreciation for all kinds of wonderful, culturally relevant literatures, and also the way that we can touch and make a difference in people's lives. So muchas gracias to
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Juan and all of you who made this happen.
Thank you, Dr. Cantu. We really appreciate you. And we'll be in touch. Thank you much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and stay cool out there.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks, everyone. Great to
Thanks.
see
Bye-bye.
your pictures. Bye.
Oh, wow, look at this. Hi.
Bye.